3, 2. All right, hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. I had a chance briefly to chat with our guest speaker before we went live here, and she is representing Mississippi right now, originally from Chicago. I know she's gonna drop a ton of knowledge today, so this hour is gonna fly by super quickly. I just want to go over some housekeeping rules before we get things kicked off so that everyone feels comfortable and confident in this next hour. Of course, I like to start off by saying the world is on fire right now. Lots of things in the air to unpack and talk about and resolve and, give love to. So I just want to say thank you for being here with us for this next hour. You could have been anywhere else in the world, virtually, of course, but you're deciding to spend time with us. So I just want to say thank you. I see you. With that said, we believe in visibility here at Power to Fly, as I know that a lot of you as well do. So I would love to invite you all now to turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. If you haven't showered today, doesn't matter. We can't smell you with virtual community. That's the beauty of it. Put your virtual backgrounds on if you don't feel comfortable showing where you are in the world. But, we would love to see your beautiful faces. So that's my invitation to everyone to turn their cameras on. I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noise, but I can't stress enough, would love to hear from you throughout this next hour. So feel free to, hop off of the mute when you have anything you want to share, any dreams last night that you had, any anecdotes, if you have any of your own tips and tricks that you find helpful that you want to share, come off mute, right in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any sensitive information and you want to be kept anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie, and I will keep you anonymous. I'll flag your comment or your reflect, and I allow Alexandria to reflect on that. If you do hop off of mute, you will be featured in our live recording. I love that we've got cats rocking across the screens as well. They won't be featured in our live recording, unfortunately. We'd love to hear what the cats have to say about this whole pandemic and everything that's happening in the world. But we have to use another chat for that. I love it, Andrea, that you're always online with us, and you bring your cats to the sessions as well. We'd love for you to follow us on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got lined up for you all. And then the last thing that I'll say is we've got a great summit happening next week. So don't forget to join Power to Fly at their Diversity Reboot 2021 Summit. Get ready to enrich your mind and soul with more than 100 leaders such as Naomi Wolf, 8-time bestseller writer and author of The Beauty Myth, and Angelica Ross, founder and CEO of Trans Tech Social, for a 5-day virtual summit. You won't want to miss it. Register today for free and be a part of the conversation. And I'm hoping that someone from the Power to Fly team can drop a link in there so folks can register. All right, I'm going to pass the mic to our awesome guest speaker, Dr. Alexandria White. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're excited to share with us today, and how you came to learn about Power to Fly.
Well, hello to the 81 of you on the call. I am so excited about our chat today. A little bit about me is I'm a tough princess from Chicago, Illinois. I have 5 brothers. I'm a mother of a free-spirited 16-year-old. In my free time, I love diversity, equity, inclusion. I work with a great consulting firm, business firm, Reboot Excel. And this is what we do. We do this for companies, organizations, nonprofits, private equity firms. And so our passion is to have courageous conversations in the workplace, making sure that people have inclusive practices so that they can be better professionals and just overall better human beings. I love what I do. I will, at the end of this, please find me on LinkedIn. I will also actually give out my personal cell phone number. Yes, it will be my personal cell phone number because I believe in showing up and giving that access to people. So look forward to that if you still want to get in contact with me. But please interject. Let's utilize this chat feature and let's maximize our time together. So I hope I teach you some things and maybe you can teach me some things as well. So let's get ready.
Absolutely. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Alexandria. I just want to also shout out that you all have submitted some great questions offline. We're going to take these questions one by one, starting with this first question here. But before I read this question to everyone, I just want to shout out where we are calling from in the world. So our guest speaker, as I said, she's representing Chicago, but calling from Mississippi today. We've got San Francisco, California on the line. We've got Maryland. We've got North Carolina, Houston, Texas, Colorado, San Francisco, Budapest, North Carolina, Michigan, DC, California, Nevada, Texas, Chicago, North Carolina. We've got a lot of Chicago, North Carolina folks representing Oklahoma, Argentina, South Carolina again, California, Pennsylvania. Awesome. So if you haven't yet written in the chat box, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know where you are in the world, Virginia, Canada, Kenya. Beautiful. So Alexandra, I'd hope you keep this in mind as you reflect on these questions. We are pretty global on this call. And so if you see your question pop up on the screen, feel free to hop off of mute or write in the chat box. If this is not your question and you still want to chime in, again, we'd love to hear from you. So Alexandra, let's start with this first question here. Microaggressions reinforce privilege and undermine a culture of inclusion. Can you offer some tips or tools on how to communicate effectively and be well received in a situation where microaggressions may exist?
All right. So let's start with some terminology. We have a global audience here. And so before I even give any tips and tools, I want to make sure that the people on this call even know what microaggressions are, right? So I'm actually going to give you the term, and it was created by a Columbia professor, Dr. Daryl Sue. And so microaggressions are as follows. They are brief and commonplace daily, verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards a stigmatized or culturally marginalized group. Okay, we want to start with the foundation there. And so the question asks, can you offer some tips and tools on how to communicate effectively in the situations where they exist? And so since this work is personal to me, inclusive communication, diversity, equity, inclusion, very, very personal to me, I want to give you an example. I'm often introduce myself to people, right? As I said, I come from a family full of majority of men. And so I introduce myself, I shake hands, I smile, I have all of that information ready to go when I meet someone. And I say, hello, I'm Dr. Alexandria White. And that usually comes sometimes with people saying, you're a doctor? What kind of doctor? You don't look like a doctor. And then I go about explaining to them what type of doctor I am. And so many of you are wondering, is that a microaggression? Yes, because you are putting out, projecting that I do not fit the status quo of a doctor. That is a microaggression. That is that little paper cut that is communicating that maybe you just don't belong. The people who do it, they probably do not intend to hurt my feelings or cause me harm. However, the impact can be profound. So that is the definition, and that is an example. Now, let me give you some tips and tools on how do you communicate effectively in that situation. For me, I always do the dance, right? Do I say something? Do I let it go? Where am I? Things like that. All of that comes into mind. But I want to give you 3 ways to respond. Do you let it go? Do you correct it immediately in that place? Or do you respond later? Will you be in close proximity to that person so that maybe you can respond later? All of these are good tips. But I want to talk to you something from the Harvard Business School, and it's called the 4 Ds of dealing with microaggressions. First one, discern. Do you have time to even invest in correcting someone's microaggression? Is it on a subway? Is it in a conference room? Is it in a meeting? Disarm. So if you choose to confront this microaggression, be prepared for resistance, right? Or be prepared for someone who might be willing to listen. Defy. Challenge the perpetrator of the microaggression with questions. I do this all the time. What do you mean? Can you explain this further? It usually catches them off guard and it allows them to start internally processing, maybe I said something that wasn't quite right. And the last one, decide. Will you take action professionally, personally? Decided upon how you will take action, kind of like how I mentioned before, later or in the moment. And so I'm going to pause. Any questions in there, Mary Ellen?
No questions yet, but we've got some comments. So Shodi
Okay.
writes, yes, paper cuts is such a good term for it. And then Linda writes, how does one look like a doctor? Grateful to be here and part of this discussion, joining from Brooklyn, New York. So I'd love for you to comment on some of those comments in the chat box. Also, everyone on the call, feel free to write, any reflections or comments regarding what Alexandria has just reflected on. Thank you so much for diving in deep there, by the way. I appreciate your thorough response with giving a foundation and also giving your personal, a personal story to complement that. I guess my follow-up question would be, how can you practice patience in deciding how to respond to these, microaggressions?
And so for me, because I've had that encounters a lot, I'm usually aware of that, what people might say to me. But I know my triggers, Mariella. I know my triggers, and everyone on this call knows their triggers. And so for me, when my heart starts beating and I know that this person has said something so vile, so inconsiderate, I know my triggers, and then that is when I decide, do I have the labor right now to correct them? And if they are a colleague or a family member, let me sit on this. I am very aware that I have strong opinions, right? And so I'm usually very, very keen on how can I be more inclusive. I know my triggers. I know what is going on when a severe microaggression has happened. And so one of the things is know your triggers and know how you respond in those positions. The one that I mentioned, I'm used to it. I'm able to navigate time, place, manner. I'm able to navigate. But there are some triggers and some microaggressions that I'm just not able to navigate that can be offensive as well. So
Beautifully spoken, beautifully said. I appreciate that. Also, there's one thing, Alexandria, I think you might have some notifications on,
okay.
and our live callers are asking if it's you, if you could mute it. If it's anyone else, I don't think it is, but please mute your notifications so that we can hear clearly throughout the next hour. And then with that said, I'm just going to flag some of the things that folks are writing in the chat box here. So Caroline writes, I absolutely love your candor, Dr. White. Angelina writes, my favorite is you're so well spoken, ... Karen writes, I think the setting will impact my response. For example, work setting or a personal setting. Jacqueline writes, this is a question for you, Dr. White. Would you use the same framework as an observer of the microaggression versus the direct recipient of microaggression?
Actually, that's coming up. It's it's coming up. So stay tuned. It's coming up in a couple more slides on how to maybe interject when you see things like that. So who asked that again, Mariella?
This is Jacqueline.
Yeah, Jacqueline. Just stay tuned.
Awesome. And then Audrey writes, I find it so challenging to respond to microaggressions in the context of a professional environment, especially when the microaggression comes from someone with power. And I'm sure that we all resonate with that, Audrey. So thank you for to reflect on that statement, Alexandria.
Yes. So, well, look, listen, time is of the essence. So we're going to dive in. So one of the questions is, when my boss says derogatory things, right? That's a question in a couple more slides. How do I handle that? And so it's that balancing act. You know your supervisor better than we do. You know how your supervisor takes criticism. Are they offensive? Or do they accept criticism? Are they one of those supervisors that you have to give them concrete detail? You know that, right? And so one of the things that I tell people when they are talking about their supervisor is to understand how it can impact you and them. And so I always lead with self-improvement. And so when people are always talking, I don't know how to confront my supervisor. I am scared. I might lose my job. They might not give me this assignment. And so I believe in leading with love and being inclusive. And so I often tell people, why don't you frame it this way? When you say these things, it makes me uncomfortable. Sorry, I hope you guys don't hear the ambulance in the background. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. This is real life is happening with virtual events. We just all have to be patient and mindful that we go with it. We go with it. Thank you everyone for being real with us today.
And so asking them, do you mind if I give you some feedback in regards to some things that you might say to me? Not in a public setting, one-to-one, even we're going to talk a little bit about our inclusive spaces on virtual rooms, such as this, and having that one-on-one in a call, in a FaceTime with your supervisor about how their comments do not seem inclusive in how they make you feel. Make sure you use I statements. I feel uncomfortable when you joke about this. I feel uncomfortable when you paint a certain demographic with a broad statement. Making sure that you use I statements. But there's some more to go into that as well. So we're going to keep going. Anybody else for this presentation? We're definitely not going to finish the presentation. We're definitely
with over 100 people on the call, and I love because I started off by inviting folks to write in the chat and come off mute, which I stick to that. So I will continue to flag what you all are writing in the chat box. But for this sake of time and for the folks that previously submitted questions, let's try to get to some of these here. Okay. So let's move on to this question here, and then I'll let you know I've got some private messages as well. Someone says we need to have a part 2. I echo that sentiment as well. All right, so Alexandria, let's move on to this one here. How to have
I love this.
Okay, good. Let me read this one for everyone.
So,
let me read this out loud for everyone, just in case someone might be commuting and they can't read the screen here. So, how to have a constructive dialogue with people from vastly different backgrounds, experiences, and levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion competency. How do you communicate the need for inclusion to an exclusive group?
Okay. So I'm so happy this is a global audience because everyone comes to this room with their lived experiences, with their voices, with things that triggers them. We all are one big microcosm of different experiences. And so when you talk about constructive dialogue, it's important to lay the foundation. It's kind of like what I did in the first slide. Everyone has their ability to engage in the conversation, but laying the foundation is key to a constructive dialogue, especially in terms of DEI, which we know can be uncomfortable for some people. We know that some people, we were told, we don't talk about religion, politics, or race in the workplace. And most of us spend a lot of time in our workplace. And so, how are we going to have constructive dialogue around things that matter to us? And DEI matters to us. Okay, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. For everyone who doesn't understand that acronym, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And actually, that shows up throughout the presentation. And there's any terminology that I use, please feel free to message me or Mariella, because I do this a lot. So sometimes I'm not familiar with everyone's competency. So thank you, whoever asked that. I saw that in my chat.
Beautiful. And then actually, I would love for you to talk about why that's, a new-ish acronym
Okay.
that we're seeing more and more these days. I'm sure you can dive in deep there with, historically speaking, we've not paid attention to diversity, equity, inclusion, and now this is, an acronym that we're seeing more and more. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. So let's do I'm going to do 4 words: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Those are 4 basic terminologies that start the conversation and make you a more inclusive communicator by at least understanding those 4 words: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Okay. There are some statistics that since the racial uprising in 2020, diversity, equity, and inclusion jobs have skyrocketed, I think 124%. Let me repeat that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion jobs have skyrocketed due to racial uprising. Companies, organizations, nonprofits, even our government are adding these positions. Why? Because they know that in order to be competitive in this progressive society, you have to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion. Reboot Excel, we actually do inclusive leadership training because companies want to have a diversity lens as part of their overall strategic plan. Because when you have that, you attract diversity, you retain diversity, you promote diversity. And those aspects make you a very competitive business. There is a moral case and there is a business case for diversity. The moral case, hey, that's the right thing to do. The business case, and you can Google this, you can find statistics that it improves your overall company. It improves employee engagement across the board. You don't believe me? Type it in. Reach out to me. I will provide you data. I love doing this. And so that was a good question, Mariella. Why are we doing it? Go on LinkedIn. I am actually going to promote some things on LinkedIn. Please follow me on LinkedIn, message me on LinkedIn. People put their LinkedIn links in the chat, because if you go on LinkedIn, just type it in: diversity position, equity inclusion. Type those in. You will see that companies, they are reaching out. They want that aspect of their business. Questions? Did I answer that, Mariella? Pretty good?
Yes, and we've got folks chiming in with their experience on, how they've been educated or how they've been able to recognize the importance of DEI at work and at home, essentially. So thank you all for writing that in the chat box. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next question
Okay.
here. I love how you're diving in deep here. And also, I love that you are giving the moral case first, because it's the right thing to do. And then, of course, be competitive as a business. Someone in the chat box, I'm just going to highlight this. Monica wrote, yes, it is no longer a choice for companies. So that's one of the highlights that we can really, praise on this chat here. All right, so let's move on to this question. How can I express in a resume or cover letter that it is important to me that my future employer has a JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion mindset? I love this question, and I'd love to hear from you, Alexandria.
Yes, so I say Jedi. I say empower your Jedi forces, right? Get those Jedi forces going. Um, let's start on the macro level. There was a survey from Monster. Everybody knows what Monster is. Monster is a search engine, a job search engine. And 83% of Gen Z, I'm a millennial, Gen Z is after me, candidates say that a company's commitment to diversity and inclusion is important when they're choosing an employer. So before we can get to your resume or your cover letter, let's start with, how do you look for jobs? Is it important that your job that you're applying for has a diversity and equity lens? This is so important. Glassdoor, everybody familiar with Glassdoor? Can I get some head? Okay, I see some head nodding. Glassdoor is now letting people rate whether their companies that they work for are diverse and inclusive. They're putting that information out there. McKinsey revealed that companies with the most ethnically diverse executive teams were more likely to outperform their peers over 33%. So that's on the macro level. You're looking at a company, you want to see if they're diverse, you want to see if they're inclusive. You look at their social media presence. Do they have young, old, families, different ethnicities in their graphics? Do they even have a diversity and inclusion page, or a social responsibility page, or a social governance page? These are things that you can look for when you are even job hunting. I go on LinkedIn. I help people do LinkedIn audits. And I ask them, what do you want companies to know about you? And they tell me, well, I want them to know that I'm passionate about social justice. Okay, well, that also goes both ways. When I work with companies, what do you want potential employees to know about you? Well, I want them to know that everyone is welcome. Okay, well, let's just make sure your social media represents that. All right, so you found a company, you like them. Now you're ready to submit your resume and your cover letter. So, what is the mission? What is the values and the purpose of the company? If it has a diversity lens, put that into your cover letter. I noticed that your mission states that you are inclusive of everyone who works for your company. As someone who that is very imperative to, I would like to utilize what they are already saying in your cover letter. Look at their job description. Is it inclusive language? Integrate that into your cover letter. There are many people on this call who have diversity experience. How are you highlighting that on your resume? Is it at the top? Is it in presentations? Is it in research that you've done? Is it in community activities? Highlight that on the resume. So that is all I have for now. Any questions, Mariella?
Actually, yes. So a question on, if you don't have experience, which I find this to be a very transparent question. So if you don't have any experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, how can you get that experience, and add that to your cover letter or resume? I'd love to hear your response to that, because of course, right now, especially as you mentioned, all of the racial injustice that has been happening, especially last year. There is this, focus on, how do we unpack this? How do we move through this and become more balanced, as people? And I find that as far as when I'm speaking with folks online, and everyone wants to help, but they often want a quick fix solution. They want the button. They want the button that ends racism and we're good, or they want the button that ends sexism and we're good. How can, just to take this private question a little further, how can folks get the authentic experience so that they are practicing emotional intelligence CEI world?
So I want to give you two things, right? Work with companies. Got a message from a company soon as George Floyd happened. Oh my gosh, we're going to send out an email about how to talk to your Black employees about George Floyd. And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We will not do that. I will not be a part of that. I will not advise that. That was that knee-jerk reaction, right, Mariella? I want to do something. I want to do something. That was not it. That's on the business part. On the personal part, I've had people contact me. I want to do this. I want to do that. I haven't done enough. Can you pause for a moment? Let's pause, because knee-jerk reactions are not healthy and they are not authentic. And so I tell people, do a personal inventory. Do a personal inventory. Are you doing the work yourself? Performative things regarding social justice do not last. And so it is up to you to do the work. Many people on this call, well, what is the work? Let me tell you what the work is. The work is, how can I use my status, my access, my privilege, my ableism to help others? It's not always about race. It can be about socioeconomic status. It can be about ableism. It can be about sexual orientation. It can be about financial literacy. Start with yourself. Do you have a circle of friends that are different from you? Do you read books, articles, listen to podcasts, things that challenge you? There is no diversity finish line. As Mariella said, I do this work, I've been doing it for 15 years, and I continuously challenge myself in diversity spaces. And so if you are just beginning, you're gonna make mistakes. You're going to maybe ask some questions. You're going to feel uncomfortable. So get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I know people have heard that before. There are books to read. I'm an academic. I tell people to read books all the time, but sometimes reading a book is just that. What's an actionable step that you can do? After you've done the self-work, after you've realized, okay, there were some things that I did not know, let me go ahead and maybe find a trusted friend, a professional facilitator, someone where I can be vulnerable with. And so when we do these inclusive leadership workshops, that is the space that we build. We allow people to say what they really want to say when we're not in the room. We don't record our sessions. We make sure that people feel comfortable to ask those questions they've always wanted to ask a mother, always wanted to ask someone who is Muslim, always wanted to ask the Black person this question. And so we create those spaces so that people can feel comfortable. But the first thing that I say is definitely doing the work. I saw some people putting books, book recommendations. Flood the chat. Let's flood the chat with any books that you have read that have helped you along your journey of being more inclusive and learning about diversity. I have some. I know people on here have some. Please, please. Oh, Audrey, I'm looking at that book right now. I'm Still Here by Austin Channing. I'm looking at that book right now. Absolutely love it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for the invitation to
Mhm.
drop knowledge in the
Mhm.
chat. So let's take that invitation. Write any books that have been helpful for you
Mhm.
in the chat box, and also be sure to write your preferred way of connecting, because I would love to put these things into practice now. So we clearly have folks on the line who are interested, who are willing to engage, who are willing to learn. So if you can write, your preferred way of connecting, whether it's LinkedIn, your website, your email. Alexandria is going to share her private number, which I love, at the end of the chat. So write in the chat box your preferred way of connecting, and then reach out to folks at the end of the call, how we all can learn and build bridges together. So great. I won't read all of these books here that are in the chat box. I love that you all are
I
writing this. So
love it.
thank you.
I'm looking at some I read. I love it. I absolutely love this.
Any of your favorites, Alexandria, that you want to
Oh
highlight?
goodness. Oh my goodness. Kimberly Crenshaw, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Um, oh my goodness. How to Be Anti-Racist, White Fragility, Fatigue by Mary Winters. So you want to talk about race. Um, when I am riding in my car, podcast that I listen to, Uncomfortable Conversations from a Black Man, the 1619 Project, Code Switching, just types of podcasts. So I could go on, but that's just some of the stuff that I do passively. Oh yes, Claude Steele. I love Professor Steele. Um, so yeah, those are just some of the ones that I do listen to passively or reading.
Beautiful. So I'm just going to throw this out there, throw the net out there, since we've got a lot of folks who are reading and listening. And as you reach out to folks who are on this call, I see that Nicole from Power to Fly is writing the Google Doc there for you to write your LinkedIn's there. We can keep it all neat,
Oh, I
and that'll
love.
be a great
Okay.
way to reach
Okay.
out to a couple folks at the end of this call, and maybe start a book club or reflect on some of these essays or books or podcasts together. Because I love that, Alexandria, you're saying, reading is one thing and then taking action is another. So, I find that when I have some folks holding me accountable after I read or after I listen, that really propels me forward. So I send the invitation to you all as well. I'm loving the energy on this call. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. For the sake of time, we'll move on to this next question. Again, if you see your question on the screen, feel free to hop. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hold for a light pause to see if someone would like to hop off of mute and share some words with Dr. White here. So I know some folks need that time. I'll hold for a light pause. Feel free to hop off of mute, and we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Monique. I'm calling in from Chicago. Thank you for being here and facilitating this with us. I have recently, and I'd say recently in the past month or two, shifted my dialogue with people when they ask for resources. What I found in my role as a DEI manager is that people will come to me all the time. What should I read? What should I watch? What should I listen to? And what I would do is I would spend, 10 minutes, putting together a list of resources that would then just sit in their inbox. So what I've done now, or what I'm pivoting to now, is saying, hey, when I get that question, it's like, well, tell me what you've already found on your own, because my Google search key works just as well as theirs. And that tells, if someone can't answer that question, it tells me that they're really not quite ready and they're not quite that invested yet. Doesn't mean they won't get there, but they will. So when people say, well, I was online and I saw this book and I, was thinking about listening to this this podcast or this author, then we have dialogue. That's when I can say, okay, well, yeah, I've read that person, or yeah, I've seen their TED talk. What did you think of it? This is what I thought of it. Then you've got a conversation. But what I don't want to do for self-preservation at this point is just give resources that people may or may not look at. So you've got to come to the table with something that you've already explored on your own before, so that we can have a conversation that's going to be meaningful and get us to the next stage.
I
So
love
that's for me.
I love it. Everything to what she said. Thumbs up to what she said. But she also made me think of something. I'm Monique and we do this for a living, right? Reboot Excel, we do inclusive leadership training. We do coaches around diversity, equity, inclusion. This is what we get paid to do. I want you to pause sometimes and think of that gay friend, that trans friend, that Black friend, that Asian friend, that disabled friend. Are they always being asked to educate? I want you to step back and do some self-educating for yourself instead of always going to that marginalized group. That can be taxing. So while there are people on here that get paid to do what I do, in your networks and in your circles, personally or professionally, sometimes it's good to step back and understand that extra tax that minority or underrepresented group has to encounter. Always having to educate people. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? It can be taxing. However, if you've built a rapport with people, it's okay sometimes, but just be cognizant of that. Yes, Monique said it can be exhausting. Yes.
And I have a direct private message here, and I think it would be opportune to speak about this here now. So let's hear. It would be great to hear about how Dr. White helps people get comfortable to share those very personal thoughts in DEI awareness sessions or training. So you're speaking a little bit to that now. I'm just kind of asking you to dive in deeper there to maybe answer this private question as well.
I'm not in person anymore. So when I used to do these trainings, I'm very keen on body language, emotional intelligence, how people walk into the room, how they're sitting in their chairs with their arm fold, how they were voluntold to come to my training, right? I know all of that. I know that. I get the vibe. They were just told to show up, right? So I really can't get that virtually. However, when I start a presentation, there are some norm setting things. One of those is humility. You don't know what you don't know. I deal with people who make a lot more money than me. They have a lot more money than me and status. And so I understand that some of them might not be so humble. And so I talk about that. I talk about humility. I talk about vulnerability. I talk about confidentiality, and I put myself into the work. Storytelling is the new currency. Vulnerability is the new currency. And so I can't ask you to be vulnerable and be engaged in such an uncomfortable conversation if I come to you with the know-all and be-all, which I do not, in which I make sure in my sessions I am open for criticisms, critique, and all of the above. And so that usually works. People feel comfortable to private chat or say things that they would not normally say. And so those are just some of my techniques that I use when I do these inclusive leadership trainings.
I love that. Thank you so much for being transparent there, and for having the patience to be vulnerable all the time. I also believe in that same sentiment. I love that you're saying that storytelling is a new currency. I love Yuval Noah Harari, his books, Homo Sapiens, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And I love that he says one thing that we're great at as Homo Sapiens, we create fiction, and so storytelling, if that can bring us together, and if we can practice emotional intelligence through storytelling, I have to hope that we will, build a better future, a better present actually first, and then a better future. I'd love to segue into this question here on the screen, because you did say how, as we are moving virtually, it is a little, we do have to transform the way that we are communicating. And so I'd love to tap into this question here. What are some ways to ensure inclusivity in communication when all members of a team work from home? How can we be privy to body language, sensitivity, transparency, vulnerability, and all of that jazz?
So this virtual world has changed us immensely. In the background, you hear my phone pinging, you hear an ambulance, kids crying, cats walking across the stage or the video. all of this, right? To me, it shows that we're human. And actually, this space has shown so much the human side of so many people that you worked with, and you just thought they were stuffy, but they have kids in the background, and sometimes they have stuff laying on the floor. And so people talk so much about what the pandemic has decreased us to. But before I give tips on how to be a, virtual inclusive, I want to say that this virtual world has humanized us in that way. Um, Inclusivity in the virtual workplace. Boundaries. Welcome and respect boundaries. That's basically understanding that just because I'm at home, please do not FaceTime me out of the blue, which some people have been subject to. Please do not have calls that would be inappropriate if we were in the office 6, 7 o'clock, 8 at night, because that we are at home. Understanding family makeup. Right now, I've got a 16-year-old upstairs with COVID, right? Yeah, my daughter has COVID. And so I am balancing listening to her and presenting, right? And so understanding family makeup. Are there older people that that live in the home? Are there kids? Are you going to have an 8 o'clock Zoom call when that many parents are getting their kids ready for school? Because not all people are homeschooling their children. Technology. A lot of people might not have a new laptop that can download the latest things or download the latest virtual backgrounds. Understanding those things. Cognizant of work-life balance, dinner time, lunchtime. Acknowledging Zoom fatigue. So there is a presentation on Friday from Reboot Excel that we're doing exactly about Zoom fatigue. And it is real. And it's talking about everything from your lighting to how long you're sitting down to weight gain to all of that in regards to nutrition. So check that out. Zoom fatigue is real. For people who are conducting these meetings, like Mariella, who are the main person that's controlling the time frame, can you let people out earlier, 5 to 10 minutes, so that they can get up, get some water in between their next virtual meeting? Give that space. I know people who have meetings back to back to back to back, literally from 8 to 5, and there are no breaks in between. Be cognizant of that. I also want you to be cognizant of something called distance bias, and then we can move on. So distance bias is actually a real bias that that's happening in virtual spaces. We have a bias whether we're looking at someone's video, their background, if they have their camera on or off. Be aware of that, especially if you're a supervisor or if you're in a team, making sure that you're not holding any bias for someone who doesn't have their camera on, whose virtual background is not on, or they just don't have, you can't see them at all. So look up distance bias and be aware of that in virtual settings. So just wanted to give a couple of those. Hope I answered that in that regard. Anything in the chat, Mariella?
We've got Diane Flynn, who dropped the link there for the Zoom fatigue workshop. Thank you for writing that in the chat, Diane. I definitely invite folks to hop over there because, like you said, it is real. Nicole Felter from the Power to Fly team has also dropped a link in the chat. Just helping us to thrive a working parent combating the guilt of a thriving career. So I love that, we are able to share virtual space and, really try to support each other during these crazy times. We do have about 9 minutes left. So I did see, Paula, I saw that you came off of mute. So I'd like to give the floor to you to share your voice. You can hop off mute there.
Thank you very much. I actually sent my question to you, and Dr. White
Let's see.
answered it so beautifully. I asked the question about just how to get people out of their comfort zones in these training spaces, and you answered it so well. So thank you for that, and I appreciate you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So I do want to ask if anyone else wants to hop off of mute. We've got about 9 minutes left. Otherwise, I'll pass the mic back to Alexandria for you to leave us with some food for thought, or hit on any questions that you were excited to get to that we didn't have a chance to get to. For now, I'll hold for a light pause. If someone would like to hop off of mute to share their voice, now is your time to shine.
Hi, I had a quick question, and forgive me, I had to put my mask on because I had maintenance people come in, so don't be biased against me.
Please do, right?
I just have a quick question. Is there a reason why companies group together diversity and inclusion? For me, at my company, they just had this book, Big Diversity and Inclusion Push, but the person who's in charge, to me, is a gay white man. And I don't understand how those two correlate, because the experiences of a gay white man very much differ from the experiences or the lifestyle of a Black woman, or Blacks in general, or Black and brown people. So I just wanted to understand why the companies are grouping those two together when they could very much be so different.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an analogy really quick, Rashida, with that. Diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm going to give you an analogy, and then I'm going to answer your question. Think of diversity as me inviting these 100 people on this call over to my home for dinner. That's diversity. Inclusion is making sure that all of you eat. And belonging is asking Rashida, what does she want to eat? Okay, diversity is you're coming over for dinner. And inclusion is, I'm going to make sure that you have that dinner. And belonging is, I'm going to ask you for a specific thing that you want. That is why companies, you can't have one without the other. And if you have diversity without inclusion, it's none void. Okay, because this call is very diverse. Think of it this way. We've got people from Argentina, Hungary, California, San Fran. It's diverse all across this call, these 100 people on the call. Inclusion is listening to each of their experiences, how they show up on this call. Now, as a white gay man, no, he does not understand. He might empathize, but he does not understand how you walk through the world as a woman of color. However, you might also not understand how he walks through the world as a gay white man. And so while he does not have all of your identities, he can empathize and learn from you and enact policies, procedures, communities, initiatives that can be inclusive of all. Now, he's leading this diversity. I know he's not doing it alone. And so this is everyone's work. You are not an island, Rashida. I am not an island. This is everyone's work. And so, since you know that he is not able to totally understand how your lived experience is, if you have time, offer your advice. These are some programs that would help my demographic. Another thing that I strongly urge people when they're doing all of this diversity work, please do affinity groups. When George Floyd happened, I'm co-chair of a large women's organization, and we did affinity groups We had a group for white women who needed to unpack that. We had a group for trans people who needed to unpack that. We had a group for Black people. And so affinity groups, there is nothing wrong with that, because how me and Rashida talk is going to be different than how other demographics talk when we talk about that. And so that is okay. It is okay to have affinity groups with people who share some of your identities so that you can be candid. Rashida, did I answer that okay?
Yes, that was perfect. That helped me process it very much. So thank you.
You're welcome. Andrea, let's see, affinity groups, affiliate affinity groups. Okay, do we have time? Do we have time, Mariella? Okay.
We have time. We have about 3 minutes, and I wanted to say thank you, Rashida. I would encourage more folks to, you know, voice their frustrations, their questions, their concerns, you know, in these safe spaces, you know, that we hold, so that we don't have to be alone with them and then let them fester and then, you know, hurt ourselves or hurt other people. So let's learn from Rashida. Thank you so much. I definitely learned. And I know that we've got tons of questions left. Alexandria, did you want to hit on something else?
I'm looking at Karen's. We are working to formalize ERGs. Yes, ERGs or BRGs. For people who don't know, that's an employee resource groups or business resource groups. I like to say the term engaging resource groups because we want these ERGs to be engaging. Karen, reach out to me. We do ERG formation. We help with resources. I love to help you. People of color ERGs, women ERGs, LGBTQ plus ERGs, all of these are great resources for companies to start implementing to be more diverse. How do you, okay.
And Dr. White, I'm going to pause you there because unfortunately we won't get to answer all of the questions. So I'm going to direct everyone who, I love that everyone is eager to just pick your mind. I encourage you all to reach out to Alexandria White here. She has her information here on the screen, and really take advantage of you know, what she is teaching and sharing on her platforms. I'm excited to support and learn with you all offline as well. So we just have about 1 more minute. Dr. White, I'd love for you to leave us with some food for thought. And then again, remind us of how we can stay in touch with you when we end this conversation.
So thank you to everyone on this call who has listened to my voice. Thank you for contributing. In this time, in our country, in our world, where there is so much sadness, death, please rejoice in the good moments. Please love on each other. This work and communicating is so important now that we don't have the access to see and travel and maybe hug on each other as we used to. And so in closing, while I have given many tips and resources, you have also provided me with tips, resources, and just appreciation for sharing this space. So I am on LinkedIn, alex.white@RebootExcel. Please, please, please text me, call me. I more than likely pick up. So it has been a wonderful experience. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all some way, somewhere.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. You will get a rewatch email with the link to this video so you can take notes. Again, I know we dropped so much knowledge here live, so you will be able to rewatch this. So look out for that email and enjoy the rest of your day. You know, have faith. Be the change you want to see. I know that is a universal truth. It is not a cliche. Be the change you want to see, and we'll see you all on the next chat. Thank you again, Dr. White.